Pleasure. Before starting, could you tell us how did you start your career in PR?
To be honest, I started it by accident. I was not meant to work in public relations. I really wanted to be a journalist. Yet I've been in this industry for the past 10, 11 years now. And I worked with very big businesses. Then I slowly started working with startups because I realized that public relations that they need is slightly different from the big brands. And this is something that I will go into a little bit more detail once I'll start my presentation.
So you can make sure that international PR is the key for startups, right? To go
Absolutely.
global, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you do have to have this, mindset that you're going to be going globally and internationally, because being a very successful startup in your local region, in the country of your origin is quite easy. But when it comes to expanding globally, of course, the market is huge, but so is the competition. So you always have to think a couple of steps ahead.
Exactly. I'm also very keen to hear your tips and tricks. So are you ready to share your advice?
Absolutely. Yes, let's get started.
So the stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So as I've mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the power of international public relations, especially for startups. I'll tell a little bit about my journey, what PR is, what it is not, as well as I will share some basic tips and tricks that you can have if you can't or don't want to hire a PR agency, or you're just starting out and just need some tips. So as I've mentioned, the Black Unicorn PR is based in London, was born in London 3 years ago. And the whole reason why we've started it is because I was working with very big brands. I worked in TomTom, I worked in Visa, I worked during Sochi Olympic Games. And the whole reason working with big brands is obviously they're already quite well known. And whenever you pick up a phone and call a journalist, they know who you are. Right. And in 2014, 2015, when every other startup, when every other person in the UK and London especially started opening their own business, there are loads of startups all of a sudden appeared. And I thought that obviously when you have a very limited budget, not a lot of people know about you yet, the public relations will play quite a different yet a key role. And ever since we grew to 7 people of team. We have clients from across Europe, predominantly in the UK. We also work with a lot of Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Denmark, South Africa, you pretty much name it. We predominantly work with technology. We're focused on fintech, yet we do have a few other clients in a couple of other industries. So the main idea and the main role of public relations is to make sure that you have your reputation, it is quite solid. So whenever someone is looking for a certain product that you are providing, probably, when they're doing their research, they will see that you've been in some quite high profile publications, meaning that someone gave you the validation and that you're actually a legit company. So here on the screen now, you can see some of the titles where our clients ended up, and considering that we work with quite small startups, it's quite a big deal, ending up in the New York Times, BBC, or even the Times. Let's start probably with the most important part of what PR is and what it is not. And a lot of people get it confused with advertising. So public relations is not advertising. This is something that you cannot buy because, as with any reputation, whether it's personal or professional, it cannot be bought. So if you look at the Edelman's Trust Report, and Edelman is probably the best PR agency that is out there, 67% of people may buy a product, but unless the reputation of the product is quite a good and a solid one, they won't be buying it again. So you might be losing out on customers if you don't have the constant media presence. And 3 in 4 people tend to avoid advertising. So think about YouTube. When you're trying to watch a video, you have a pop-up of ads and you can skip in 5 seconds, and pretty much every person is doing that. So you have to realize the value of public relations, and the value of advertising that it has. So just in a nutshell, public relations deals with reputation and reputation predominantly, and this is something I mentioned you can't buy. It helps you to turn your powerful ideas into impact free of charge. Once again, simply because you do not have to buy space in a certain publication. It is all about image and credibility. It's enhancing your trust. And enhancing trust means that a journalist who wrote about you did his due diligence, they did a full research, and they gave you their validation, which means that obviously this is something that you haven't purchased. It's also like a long-term patterns of interaction, simply because public relations and creating your reputation does not really happen overnight. And a lot of times when you pitch a journalist on Monday, let's say, it might take up to a couple of weeks for the article to come out, because there are numerous external and internal factors that need to be considered. Unfortunately, slightly harder to measure because you can end up, let's say, in the Times or on BBC, which is obviously read by millions of people on a daily basis, yet there's no guarantee that your particular article has been read by those millions of people. That's one thing. And second thing, you can't really control the audience. So you might not be 100% certain who exactly read it. That's one of the reasons why sometimes niche publications might be a better option. And public relations is not just press releases that we write and just send out to a bunch of journalists. This is not the way it happens. Public relations is all about media relations, having decent and really, really trustworthy relations with journalists. It's obviously press releases, it's press conferences. As I tend to say, it's the way you walk, the way you talk, and how you accidentally spill coffee or wine on people that you want to have a conversation with. So nothing happens miraculously. There's always quite a huge strategy behind it. With advertising, it's quite straightforward. So you have a product, you have money, you've paid a certain publication to do advertising for you, and you said that this product is the best thing that ever happened to humanity. And it's pretty much obvious that a marketeer will write that. A conscious and a sophisticated reader, such as your peers, C-level executives, and also investors, they will realize that it is a sponsored post and that you've paid for it. And of course, the messaging is going to be biased, simply because no one will say that, their product is not really good, paid loads of money for it, and, they're appearing, let's say, somewhere in the FT. It's quite important to remember that whenever you pay for content, it is always clearly labeled that it was bought by or sponsored by, because that's how a conscious reader can realize that you have paid for a certain product for the messaging. It also can be quite expensive, and it really depends the media that you go into. Let's say Financial Times, the whole page there is approximately £90,000. And it does not necessarily have the impact that you want. It will not have the impact on your reputation. And obviously, you're never working with journalists, you're always working with marketeers. So if public relations is not really, advertising, you don't really pay to appear in different medias. So what is it? It is all about influencing, engaging, and building relations with key stakeholders. And you might have your own audiences that you're trying to target depending on what kind of journey you're on, whether it's going to be your investors that you're trying to engage with, or your clients, or your potential customers, your shareholders, etc. So it's all about that, because by the end of the day, influencing, engaging, and building relations will influence how people perceive you in public. And as I mentioned, public relations is not only us writing press releases and sending it out via mail merge. It's way, way more than that. Obviously, predominantly, it is all about earning top tier media. So kind of getting all those big names and outlets, making sure that they're validating your product, they're validating you as an entrepreneur, as a founder. But it's also looking after your personal and professional reputation, which means that can go down to thought leadership. So how people see you as a founder of the company. What do you say in public? how do you interact with your audiences. It's also all about attending and participating in events, not only participating in events as, let's say, you're coming to an exhibition, but also speaking at an event, because obviously to speak at an event is quite a whole science itself. The way you prepare your, once again, image, how you interact with an audience, and how do you show yourself. It can also go down to product and service launch events, which we've had a ton of experience doing. So you want to have it Apple style like, but of course, you will not have the same amount of money and marketeers working on your Apple launch, but obviously there are different tips and tricks. As I mentioned, can also be thought leadership pieces via different mediums, whether it can be an OPED piece, or it can be let's say, LinkedIn piece, or you have a blog that you're sharing with your audiences quite often. Obviously, it's interviews, it's how you hold yourself in front of the media. Those can be creative stunts. It's also part of public relations, which is probably not as relevant for startups though. And of course, crisis management. And we've been living in a very crazy world right now, so crisis management is quite important. So just to reiterate the message, what it is at core of all public relations. Unfortunately, or fortunately enough, it's not all about glamour, champagne, having and going to fancy events and participating without putting too much thought into it. But at the end of the day, it's all about protecting your business and protecting your reputation. Because you can't have a credible, well-established business without having promoting your business properly and protecting your reputation. You're trying to earn this long-lasting trust, which in the end will become a very crucial part of your customer journey. And customer journey is something that we will touch base on a little bit more in just a minute. Another thing I believe is extremely important, especially for young entrepreneurs, for first-time CEOs and founders, is to know what is good PR and what is bad PR. Because I've been working with founders for quite a lot of time, for quite some time now, for a couple of years, and they worked with some agencies before. So obviously they probably, thought that that's exactly what they wanted. But there's the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to public relations, whether it's an agency or whether you're trying to get someone in-house. So how to be able to distinguish those two, and it's quite an easy one for you, I think. Good PR, as any good business, starts with a strategy. So your public relations strategy will feed into the marketing strategy, which feeds into your business strategy. So there's no point of not having a business strategy, but already thinking about, okay, we want to be here, there, and want to be rich and famous. That is unfortunately now how it works. And good public relations strategy will make sure that you try and touch base on all the points that you have in your business strategy. Of course, it's also about being proactive, not only sharing your milestones, which can be raising a substantial amount during the fundraising, or perhaps, hiring someone extremely well-known and famous. But it's also about creating and sharing stories that come from within the startup. It also about nurturing the grand vision of the company. So as a lot of you guys, I assume, are, founders of a company, you would know that there's a certain place you want to end up in, let's say a year or two. And public relations should make sure that it feeds into that. Because I mentioned initially, it's quite a long-term thing. So you have to let it sit, stir, and nurture. Public relations is always timely and relevant. And we'll talk about newsworthiness in a moment, because without being relevant, what is happening in the world right now, it's quite difficult to do business. And of course, it's properly attending to your press office, meaning that you need to get back to journalists ideally within an hour. If you can't do that, within 2 to 4, to make sure that you don't lose that media opportunity. My favorite probably part of a business is also saying no to clients and saying no to some of the stories that we're working on. because a lot of things might seem to be quite important and quite big for you as a founder for the company, and it as well might be internally. But when it comes to looking at an international, at a grand scale, you might realize that not all the stories will actually make the cut. Bad public relations is quite an easy one. There's no strategy, no plan, no purpose. So people just do something for the sake of doing something and expecting miracles, which does not work. Also, you're trying to sell the product or service. So you're trying to make it more advertising-like instead of selling stories. And throughout the decades of me working in public relations, working with different journalists from like very important and high tier, top tier publications to quite niche ones, everyone's always saying the same thing, that they need stories. And it's the most important thing that they're looking for. Lazy work and spending your money on wires. And you guys, I have 2 separate slides on news wires, which will come down in a second. First of all, it's quite an expensive way to do something. Secondly, news wires might be seen as lazy work because you don't get the impact that you would get, when, let's say, trying to get a media placement. Also, it's missing the ability to think 3-5 steps ahead. And this is something that I've mentioned. So in the world of public relations, you live in advance, right? So if a lot of people live in the moment, we live months and months ahead. So I do say that, for clients who do something around Christmas, Christmas for me is June, July time. Poor timing, that also goes down to relevancy and being able to adapt. Neglecting research, so it's pretty much just sending out random pitches to journalists without knowing what exactly they're interested in. And of course, just saying yes to absolutely everything that is happening in the company. So my favorite probably slide so far is all going to be about news wires, because especially in the Baltics and Eastern Europe, what I've realized that is quite common to write a press release and send it via news wires. And then you do get, a few pieces of medias where they just reprint your press release, and people will be extremely happy that, they ended up in XYZ, which, let me break you the bad news, is not really valuable, and it has no impact. So the difference between proper journalistic piece and a newswire, first and foremost, you pay for your press release to be distributed, right? To appear on a number of sites. And a lot of times it can be that you will appear on something that is, considered to be quite significant and important. Let's say Yahoo Finance, as we have in the example on your right. However, your press release will be put in a section outside the editorial coverage. So when you go on Yahoo Finance website, you try to find a certain story, you won't be able to do so because it's somewhere way in the back, so meaning that it doesn't really do anything for you. Also, it always kind of labeled that it's a paid opportunity. So once again, going back to sophisticated, knowledgeable readers, they will realize that you've just paid for someone just to reprint what you wrote yourself. So any sort of news wires are owned and not earned. So it's not a press coverage. And if you can see the top image inside of the technical blah, 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 that is a newswire, and I have put in a box that it was done via PR newswire decision, and obviously it's clearly labeled that it's a PR newswire, and you can see that even the beginning of this piece is not really a journalistic piece because it is simply reprinted news release, press release that you shared with someone. And of course, readers do not really consider it to be a real journalism. Because if you see on the bottom, it's another example. It's an actual journalistic piece by quite a good journalist who's writing a lot about fintech. And first of all, you can see his name. You can see, what his role is. You can follow him to see more similar stories that he wrote. And obviously, the whole story will not start with the place, the dates, and that has been done, via newswire. The reason why I would definitely not recommend getting the news wires is because, first of all, it looks very desperate. of trying to get attention from the media without putting too much work and effort into getting an actual media placement. And it looks somewhat unprofessional to people that are quite knowledgeable about, what the press release, reprinted press release is and what an actual journalistic piece is. But at the end of the day, think about it that way, that once you have an actual real media placement written by a proper journalist who did his research, that you get impact. So media placements are all about impact because it helps them shape your reputation, the way you are being perceived, and just having reprinted press releases, well, it's no-brainer. Another thing that is important to think about is local public relations and international public relations. And that also kind of comes down to the fact that we worked so much with the Baltic startups. And a lot of times what makes news in your local country rarely will make news when you go internationally, simply because the market is huge and the competition is also quite fierce. So with local PR, obviously, the market is quite limited, not only per country, but also per region. There's much less competition, so it's easier to dominate the market with the news that you have. Homegrown success, so let's say that if you're a Lithuanian founder, you won an international award, of course, for Lithuanian media, it's going to be quite interesting and they will want to praise you because it's a big deal. When it comes to international journalists trying to pitch the story of you winning an award, it's not a big deal. It's not a big at all because there's so many other people that get awards on constant daily basis. So it doesn't have the newsworthiness to it. And of course, local markets are still emerging and trying to establish themselves, especially when it comes to media. So when you think about all the big top tier publication, you always think about, the big three in the UK, in the US, and those are predominantly English speaking ones too. So when it comes to international market, obviously, as I've mentioned, the market is enormous, but so is the competition. So to be able to stand out from the crowd, you have to have a very unique solution, a very unique story, or a very unique and charismatic founder, who will be the driving force behind it. As I mentioned, what makes news in your local country will very, very rarely mean that it will make to the same, tier news in the international journalism, simply because it does not have the same size and feel to it. Whenever you're trying to go internationally, always think about how you can adapt your messaging to that particular country that you're going to. So let's say you're looking to expand to the UK, to France, to Sweden, whatnot. You need to think how your product, your service is helping that particular country, right? So you always have to think in local terms for you, your company, your startup to be interesting for international media. Yeah, something that I've mentioned, international, it's predominantly English-speaking media has the most impact on your reputation. First and foremost, because they've been around forever. Secondly, everyone's reading in English right now, so they will be able to absorb all the information that was there. So that brings us to the next matter, which is customer journey. And I'm pretty certain that most of you should know what a customer journey is. I will briefly touch base on it, but of course, if you have any more questions, please feel free to ask. So this is your customer journey in a nutshell, how someone is looking for a product, right? And then, what is the whole journey of them finding about you, comparing you to your competitors, initially buying it, using it, and then deciding whether they're going to be an advocate and your kind of brand ambassador, or, they will just like your product and write a few nasty reviews here and there. So public relations comes into a few stages, depending on what your product is. A lot of times it can be, via awareness. So someone read about you in a newspaper or, online, and they thought, probably I'll need it. A lot of times it comes during discovery. So when you're trying to discover the product that you want and you're trying to narrow down a number of potential solutions that you will decide to go with. Or, it can be in consideration when you're doing even more and further due diligence. The beauty of public relations is that if you have two identical products and the person is deciding which one to go with, and if, let's say, you have quite a solid media presence, you have this digital footprint, you have this third-party validation, and your competitor doesn't, and they were just on a few like random blogs that no one is reading, of course, consciously, the consumer will trust you much more, and they will obviously go with you. So in public relations, obviously it's a subset of marketing, right? And the way it's looking in your customer journey, that is looking after your reputation and perception. So cultivating the image and, how people, shareholders, stakeholders, clients perceive you. As I've mentioned, I think a couple of million times already, it's all about your third-party validation, because you do not pay someone to tell that you are great. You get that promotion free of charge of someone saying that your product is really amazing. And public relations, unlike a lot of people think, is not commercial. So ending up in a certain publication does not mean that all of a sudden your website will crash because everyone will just go and like, buy, I want this, I want that, or, they won't interact with you. Yet it does help to feed into the pipeline and kind of push people through the pipeline to make sure that, they buy your product or they engage with you at a later stage. What does help quite a lot when it comes to, trying to be everyone, make sure that you have this customer journey and that you push through your potential customers as soon as possible, as thoroughly as possible, is having a peso media model, which is also integrated communications. And I will not probably stop saying enough that integrated communications is crucial when doing business as well. So advertising itself and alone won't bring you what you want. Public relations itself will definitely help you with your reputation and image and people wanting to, buy your product. But there's probably that at some point you will need social media, social media boosts and advertising. But all of them have to work in sync. So PESO stands for paid, earned, shared, and owned media. And here you can see this wonderful Venn diagram. And you guys don't worry taking notes or, taking photos of screenshots, because you can get in touch with Simona and she will share the slides with you if you wish. So you can see that there's obviously paid media, there's owned media, there's shared media, and there's earned media. And every single one of them work quite nicely on their own. However, you hit this golden middle once all of them work together. So obviously your media relations should enhance your credibility and trust, yet you should not forget about event marketing and experiential marketing if this is something that your business is doing. Then there's social media, boosting posts, having different sorts of ads targeted towards different people. Lead generation, which you can do through email marketing. There's own media, so what you guys creating yourself, videos, blogs, visuals, customer stories, employee stories. Obviously, there's community service, there's corporate social responsibility, and we probably could go on and on for another hour or so talking about this. But if you manage to nicely put together earned, paid, owned, and shared media, that will be what integrated communication is. And this is something that is extremely beneficial, obviously, in the long run. As I mentioned initially, unfortunately, PR is harder to measure, especially in terms of, when we work with startups, they ask us, so can we end up on TechCrunch, or how many publications we will be ending up on a daily basis or like on a monthly basis. And it's very hard to say that you will have, 5 to 10 media pieces per month, and these will bring you this and that. And the reason for it is the current news agenda. I guess I don't need to tell you that the world that we live in is crazy enough with everything happening on a day-to-day basis now, and obviously you need to be able to adapt. Those who are into reading and want to learn a little bit more about how you can manipulate the media, how you can fit into the media, how you can create your own stories, I definitely recommend reading Media Manipulation by Ryan Holiday. It's a fantastic book. From American side of things, I guess a little bit more, because things on the other side of the pond is slightly crazier than they're here, but definitely worth reading it because it gives you a quite good sense of understanding, how things work when it comes to media. And obviously right now, the news is dominated by coronavirus, by Black Lives Matter, by Trump's crazy election campaign. There's just all sorts of things that are happening quite quickly. And obviously, if something extremely significant is happening that particular day, that particular week, the whole news cycle is going to be dominated by that. So if you remember, when we just started coronavirus a couple of 3 months ago now or so, before that, the life went quite normal after the Australian fires. But as soon as coronavirus happened, obviously a lot of travel companies went bust. A lot of people didn't know, what to do and how they will be able to communicate, how whatever was happening in the world would affect their business. So every single huge moment like that, regardless how big or small of a company you are, will have an impact on the way you communicate with your audiences, because it's extremely important to remember that you have to stay relevant. So always think about the timeliness, want to say the right thing, because a lot of times, you can say the wrong thing, or you can expect that someone will cover you because your product is great. And, it might be, but journalists are just going to be busy with what is happening in the world. So that is quite an important thing to remember. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of two of our clients that we worked with in the past, when the news agenda was hugely dominated by all sorts of crazy stories. And this is there's two stories. One is from Safe in the City. So it's a London-based app that is tech for good, battling sexual harassment on streets. And that was happening between 2017, 2018, obviously, when Harvey Weinstein, was going on trial, when women started speaking out a little bit more about sexual harassment, that humans slowly realized that catcalling is not really flattering. It's quite demeaning. And the whole story of the founder was quite personal, because she has encountered sexual harassment, verbal, herself. And when she was thinking, what I can do better for women that are choosing to go in an unknown place, when you're traveling from A to B, apparently Google Maps take you through the shortest route, meaning that you can go for like some sort of dark alley or, construction sites. As a woman, and I can tell you that from my personal experience, it's not the most pleasant thing to do, especially, hearing people saying things to you. So she thought, why not take a slightly longer route, but it's going to be a better route, a safer route, meaning that, from A to B, you will go through a well-lit street, and you will know definitely that, no one's going to be just, well, at least hoping that no one's going to be, verbally abusing you there. So she tapped quite nicely into the whole Me Too movement, because Me Too was just, on everyone's minds. Everyone was talking about it, and that gave us an opportunity to talk about not obviously the stars that have been experienced sexual harassment, but to just mortal, simple human beings as you and I. So we've ended up in numerous publications, Evening Standard, TechCrunch, The Times, etc., simply because it was very timely. And later she started working with the Met Police, which also gave her a huge boost and credibility. The second company I'll briefly tell you about is CBD for 20. So it's selling cannabis in Europe, and let's just get it out there. It is not cannabis that gets you high. It's the CBD kind of wellness cannabis that you can get in some European countries. And also a couple of years ago, and up until now, it's hugely debated whether it should be legal, it shouldn't be illegal. When it comes to Europe, every other country has its own rules that you can sell CBD, and others you can't sell CBDs. In Lithuania, we sell a lot of hemp, which is not really CBD. So there's like the whole story to it. And the reason why it was quite interesting for the media is because the founder himself, he had actually had this human interest and story to it. And initially he wanted to help old and vulnerable people like with Alzheimer's, to take CBD oil, and that, they wouldn't be shaky. So that really, really helped. At some point we managed to get our founder to a stage where we were getting calls from journalists from the US when they wanted to know what is happening in European legislation when it comes to cannabis. So he kind of became quite a big thought leader in that space. So once again, two quite different stories, but relatively interesting one to see, how we've managed to tap into whatever was happening, which was quite a lot of noise in those industries. And now to the fun part. Is about your PR essentials. I know that sometimes hiring an additional marketing PR person might be quite expensive, or you can't really find the right fit, or hiring a PR agency might not be the right solution for you right now. However, there are a few things that you can do on a budget yourself to make sure that you at least kickstart these PR activities. So first and foremost, which I think is extremely important to remember, is newsworthiness. Unless you can understand and think of newsworthiness in international terms, it's going to be relatively difficult to try and tap into those international markets. So one of the things that I've spoke about millions of times today is timeliness. Time is key, because you need to be timely. You need to be able to adapt your business to whatever was happening in the news, and you have to think quite quickly on your feet and see different opportunities. So if you saw, let's say, a story that you feel that you can potentially tap into, start a conversation with the journalist on Monday, you can't wait for 3 weeks to get in touch with that journalist and say, let me tell you something, I saw that from 3 weeks ago, unless it's kind of a long-term thing. So always be timely. Proximity. It's all about relevancy and how responsive you are to whatever is happening, either in the world or in your industry. Impact is extremely important. As I mentioned, people want stories. They don't want someone just, shoving down the throat the product or the service that you're trying to get out there. Think about the impact that you have, either on someone's lives. Is your business helping to make someone's lives easier by reducing something XYZ times? Or, are you improving something? Was it a pain point for you and that you realized that there are no solutions similar to that? So it's all about having this human story and human side to it. And the other three, celebrity, conflict, human interest, are not that relevant to startups or to small companies. But obviously, if you have a celebrity investing in you, working with you, not getting paid for and working with you, it might be quite interesting. Conflict, always make news, because unfortunately, as human beings, bad news for us is good news. And human interest stories can be worked on. What you should have, and this is where you guys should take out your pens and pencils, is have the very basics. And please start with a press kit. And every other journalist will thank you once you reach out to them. So a press kit is essential when communicating on site, as well as when communicating with the journalist. So essentially, it's a company background, which is between 1 and 2 pages, ideally 1 page, founder's biography, and some short versions of the backgrounder, as well as biographies. The reason for it is that in the 1 A4 page, you have to be able to tell your legend. So why you've started, how you've started, did you have that eureka moment? What is your vision? And it has to be quite compact, because I know that, some of these stories can be quite long, but you have to create this legend around you of, why you do what you do. And of course, for any startup, and this is another extremely crucial point, the founder has to be quite prominent. Having a startup with just a product without a human behind it is good, but it's not good enough, because people want to know, who is behind it. You might have worked quite many years in, let's say, tech, and then you've decided to start your own tech startup. So people want that human story and human element to it. So your press kit is essential for media relations. It has to be straightforward and compact, and it has to be easy for journalists to understand. So if you work in a business that is quite wordy, so if there's a lot of jargon, you have to try and cut down on it. So there's a saying that you have to be able to explain your idea to a 5-year-old or to an old person. And if you're doing that and they don't get you, try it again, and then try to make it as simple as you possibly can. Another thing to stress, especially for younger entrepreneurs, is having high quality imagery. And I can't stress it enough how many people don't have it. And we're not talking about just the images of, let's say, screenshots of your website or anything like that. No, we're talking about two types of images. So first and foremost is the founders and the team, if you may. And that would mean that they would be wearing, let's say, a t-shirt with a logo, and you can tell that I'm not wearing that, not promoting Tommy Hilfiger either, but just having something that is quite branded, that is visual. Or you can have a white background or any other background with your logo on it. So for people, it's going to be much easier to locate what you represent. And also, if your product, let's say if you have an app, right? So how do you make an app fun and exciting to look at? It's not only that you'll have the screenshots, but also, you can have a photographer taking the photo quite up close with you on the background. So it has to be quite interesting and exciting, because by the end of the day, the number of words, and I guess sometimes even the quality of the piece that is written about you, will heavily depend on how good your images are. So definitely invest in it right away. And having the shorter versions of company background and a biography will be extremely useful for any other matters that you're going to be doing, exhibitions, speaking opportunities, any sort of marketing materials that you can be creating, as well as business presentations. Another thing that is crucial is having a press page. So let's think that you've done and dusted with your press kit. Now it's time to have a press page. And press page is literally a separate page where a journalist ends up on your website. They will be like, I know where to go. And it can be press center, media center, press, media, whichever fancy words that you feel like, you can choose that. And it's making lives of journalists so much easier, because let's not forget, well, I guess it's hard to forget the crazy world that we live in, that journalists get hundreds, and I mean hundreds and hundreds of emails per day. And let's out of 100, they're going to be lucky if at least one of them is somewhat relevant. So our job as PR professionals and your job as PR founders who are trying to do PR is make sure that you try and compose everything in such, and package everything in such a nice and interesting, good way that the journalist has all the information right away. So having a press room, and you will see a few examples on your screen right now. Once you have a press room, press page, make sure that you have your press kit there and high definition imagery. You can either have it, via Google Drive link, or you can get that people would download it in a file. Always keep adding press releases there. As I mentioned, not all the press releases will make it out there into the world, but when a journalist looks at your journey, they will see where you've been. Of course, it's extremely important to have links to notable media mentions, meaning that, let's say, if you ended up in a big magazine, in a big publication, you stick the logo. You can also add the comment or the quote from that publication, and obviously, you should have a link so people would be redirected on a different page and read all about it. And as you've seen in some of these cases, obviously there's just logos and says as seen in. Tenzing has quite a good one where they've added logos and quotes, because for your consumer potential client that's on your website, they will realize right away what the article was about, and obviously what the journalist has highlighted about your product. So yeah, and another thing to remember, even if you're a one-man band, right? Even if there's like one or two of you and you don't plan to hire anyone like to deal with your public relations, do have contacts of a PR team, right? So that would be just press at, blah.com. That once again means that the journalist will not have to go through info, because if you get a lot of emails through info, the journalist email might just all of a sudden disappear, or it's extremely timely and you will not be able to see it, so you will lose out on that opportunity. Plus, it also means that you will be tending after those emails and make sure that the journalist has everything that they need. So definitely do that. Another thing to remember is that you should not do PR in silo, and that goes down to integrated communication and the PESO model that I've just mentioned to you. So once you end up in a publication, there are numerous ways that you can try and milk it to the max. Do not create like extremely hard boundaries because your different marketing activities, because they all work nicely in sync. Always share your media placements and achievements on social media. Use logos, use quotes, make sure that it's on your homepage. If you're sending out newsletters, make sure that it's, somewhere on your newsletters. Sometimes people add it in signature, we've been featured in and whatnot. And, you can also leverage trust on social media advertising and email marketing. And that really depends, what kind of product obviously you're working with. So there's a really cool startup in London that is called BRB Travel. I think you pay a certain amount of money each month, and then in every 3 months, they send you an email of where you will go. So you kind of get a surprise trip that you paid for. And they've been all over the news. It's been quite a hit before COVID started. And they were quite smart in their social media marketing, because they have used the logos of publications that they have ended up in, as well as they've used some of the quotes that they really liked, and they've turned it as sponsored posts. So when you're scrolling through your Instagram feed, as you can see from this example, it's not just, a nice image of where, like somewhere in Venice or Paris where you could go. They're actually using this third party validation, which is quite crucial. There's a ton of smart ways that you can make sure that you make the most of your media placements. The fun part, kickstarting your media relations. And if you are not at Twitter right now, if you don't have your Twitter handle, after this session is over, please, I beg you, go and start it, because this is where journalists live, on Twitter. And it's a great place for you to see what they're interested in, to see what they've been doing. I'll give you a few tips on, how to check out for their requests. But Twitter is definitely your friend, not your foe. We wrote quite recently on our Black Unicorn PR blog about pet peeves, and we've collected some of the biggest pet peeves from journalists because they complained about it on Twitter, and it's been absolutely fascinating. So if you have a moment, please go and check it. But I've managed to add probably the most important things that you should think about, when having and starting relationships, some sort of relationship, working relationships with journalists. First and foremost, do not promise something that you cannot deliver. And that is just poor taste. Don't promise something that you can't deliver in any aspects of your life, and especially with journalists, of course. Sometimes journalists prefer to be dealing directly with founders, CEOs, or executive teams without having this medium. So what you can ask your PR agency, if you have one, they can always draft you emails and you'll send it from your own email. Journalists are not tools, they're humans. And I think a lot of people tend to forget about that. So you should always be encouraged to nurture relationships with journalists, making sure that you get to know them on, I guess, a little bit more personal level, on a little bit more friendly level. Never forget to do your basic research. So if you are into, let's say, fintech, make sure that the person that you get in touch with covers the type of fintech that you're providing. If it's a beauty product, make sure that you don't send it accidentally to BBC tech guy. So just very common sense, it seems, but it's extremely time consuming, and you have to put a lot of time and effort into it, making sure that your pitch ends up in the right place. You should never, underestimate the importance of salutation, which is just, greeting. So A lot of times people send out mail merges, and I said this is just a no-no, especially for startups, where they send a mail merge and whatever bug all of a sudden is there, you see hi, name, surname. Literally it says name, surname, instead of, let's say, saying the name and the surname of a journalist. It's just poor taste, and journalists are humans. They want to feel special, as all of us do. And yeah, as I mentioned, please do not send out mail merges. It's just not a very wise idea. It's rather you try and get, I don't know, 5 to 10 journalists that you really want to get in touch with, instead of sending out it to 500 and expecting some sort of miracles. When it comes to startups, a lot of us ask, well, can we please end up on TechCrunch? And yes, of course you end up on TechCrunch, but there's two things to it. Unless you have quite a big amount of money that you just got via funding round, they're not going to be interested. That's one thing. And second thing, even if sometimes you have a huge amount of money, but the timing is not right, you might not get that opportunity. Timing is key. So 55% of journalists prefer to be pitched in the late morning, so between 9 and 12 p.m., 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. I know around 20% prefer to be pitched between 5 and 9 in the morning. Yet it really also depends on which day you're trying to get in touch with them, because on Mondays, journalists tend to have their meetings when they decide on the news agenda, for the upcoming week. And also choose the best medium to pitch journalists. So 94% of journalists prefer to be pitched via email. 22% of them prefer to be pitched via Twitter, which is, I've mentioned, where they live. And it's a really, really good thing to try and start developing. When it comes to finding what journalists are into, you can check out hashtag journal request or journal requests, and you'll see what journalists were looking at. If you are into the American market, there is HARO, so HARO, so help a reporter out. And also a relatively new, I think, that is quoted, but instead of U, you write W, so QW. And you can sign up to those. You can see what you're interested in, decide how often do you want to get the journalistic requests, and see whether you are the right fit. So that might be a good starting point for you guys. And to kind of slowly wrap up, in terms of mistakes when people do when it comes to public relations, regardless whether it's an agency, whether you're one-man band, or when you're just starting out. First and foremost, poor timing and expecting miracles. Sending out a press release on a Monday does not guarantee you that by Tuesday you will be on cover of Forbes. It might take you a couple of years, and also Forbes probably is not exactly the place you would want to end up right now, because they have a lot of sponsored posts. Overcomplicating the language. Never use jargon when talking to journalists, even if that journalist is into that particular industry that you're working in. Try to make it as simple as possible without throwing, smart words at them. Never underestimate the power of traditional media. And I realize that I've been referring to newspapers, to physical newspapers, quite a bit in this presentation. But they have a lot of credibility, that's one thing, and they have a lot of power. So if you think who is reading, physical newspapers on a bright Sunday morning, there's still a lot of C-level executives that are interested in that. There are a lot of potential investors that are looking, and scooping for something interesting to invest in. So traditional media is definitely here, and it's going to be staying here for quite a bit. Never lie and overpromise things that you can't really deliver. Because it's easier and better to say that, we're working on something, this is our product, however, certain things are not available yet, instead of saying, yes, everything is available, then a journalist is trying it out, and you end up in a situation where you literally blatantly lie to them. And neglecting basic research. Apologies for the typo. So goes down to knowing who you're getting in touch with, why you're getting in touch with them, and making sure that the story that you have is interesting to that particular journalist. And there are like hundreds and thousands of journalists, and obviously there are like that many stories too. And here's some reading for inspiration. There's some books, there's some podcasts, there's some videos that you guys might be interested in reading a little bit more if you're deciding to start your public relations journey and, scale internationally. If any of you will ever have questions, I guess we'll go through some of the questions now, if there were any. You can always send me an email that I did not add here, but it's jj@blackunicornpr.com. I'm spending quarantine now in Lithuania, so if any of you guys in Vilnius, please hit me up. We can meet up always for coffee. Otherwise, as I mentioned, Simona will be able to share with you the slides of this presentation. But if I can be any help at all, just let me know. And in terms of questions, we have two. How to choose your PR agency and when should I do it? When starting, on what scaling already? What KPI should I set when working with a PR agency? Choosing a PR agency, do not choose it at an idea stage. That's definitely not the exact thing to do. I would choose it once you're ready to launch, once your product is quite solid, because you can't have any, you can't really put any miracles and sprinkle some, magic dust that all of a sudden will turn your non-existing or not really working product into something fascinating and then fantastic. I think once you're ready to launch and you know that you want to go out and you want to go big, 2 to 3 months before that, start looking for a PR agency to help you with that. Because a good PR strategy will take between 4 to 6 weeks to prepare, obviously to kind of narrow it down to make sure that it's perfect. And then, if you're looking for an exclusive, so I would definitely say 2-3 months before you are going public and you want to have, your stories out. What KPIs I said when working with a PR agency really depends on the PR agency you're going to be going with. When choosing a PR agency, I would always check who they worked with before, their kind of case studies, as well as the recommendations, if you get those. But what is probably extremely important is having a chemistry. Having the right chemistry with the person that you're going to be working on your account. And the reason for that is sometimes you can have a perfect product, you have a perfect PR agency, but people just don't match because their values don't match. They just don't like each other, or, there might be different clashes. And you have to remember that your PR agency, your PR person is going to be there in every single aspect of your life. So we act quite, well, PR has to go hand in hand with whatever is happening in the company, whether it's good or bad. In terms of KPIs, you can see how that PR agency is working. I know some of the PR agencies say, oh yeah, we can have like 50 articles per month. And, if they can do that, kudos to them. But you have to think about the quality. If you end up in 50 tiny, whiny publications that like 3 people are reading, obviously it will not have the impact that you would want. And if you end up like once in a month or in 2 months, in a big publication or quite important publication, that is worth so much more than that. So it's definitely case by case basis. And before deciding on your PR agency, always go with a few, just because the first kind of chemistry meeting, it doesn't cost you anything. And you can see the thinking behind the process, which is important. Another question we had is how to write a good press release. What should you mention to get attention? So a good press release, and this is something I've learned when I was studying journalism, which was a very long time ago, is that you have to have 4 Y's and 1 H. So in the very, very beginning of your press release, of your email pitch, you have to know who, what, where, why, when, 5 W's, and how. So those are all the questions you have to be able to answer right away, because even though we write a lot of press releases and obviously a lot of work is going into it, journalists tend to skim through them and they tend to look at the very first paragraph, which is who, what, where, why, when, how. So that is definitely important. The way we do it, you have to have quite a catchy headline. And then once again, simply because journalists are so busy, we add 3 to 5 bullet points summary of what we're trying to say with this press release. Don't have your press release more than like 1.5 A4 page, because by the time someone gets to the second page, they won't find it as interesting anymore. Always at the end have notes to editors, which means that it's just literally a very basic one paragraph about your company if that person has never, if that journalist has never encountered your company before, and always have contact details of your press person, even if it's not a press person, right? The name, email, and a phone number, because you never know when journalists can write you. So headline, bullet points, first paragraph with what, why, when. Oh, damn it, I forgot. What, why, when, where, why, how, right? So 5H, 5 W's, 1 H. Getting tired already, sorry guys. And then also if you have a quote from a C-level executive or someone quite important, add it, but don't add it like on top of absolutely everything. So think about your press release as a funnel, right? So but it's like the funnel is like this, so you go really, really broad and then you narrow down. The press release goes like this, it's like an inverted funnel. So you tell the most important information right away, and then you slowly start expanding it as the attention span slowly dies down. But yeah, sometimes you can get media attention even without writing a press release. So you might just see that something is quite interesting, and the journalist is interested in that, and you think, okay, guys, we do this. Then you just drop them an email saying, this is what we do, this is how we do it, would you be interested? Sometimes they say yes, sometimes they don't get back to you. You know, that's just the beauty of life. I hope that really helped your question, and I hope that answered it. And that is it. We had 2 questions. So thank you so much for having me today, Startup Lithuania. I hope you guys had some interesting insights into the world of public relations. And as I mentioned, please feel free to get in touch with me directly or with Simona if you will have any further questions about my presentation. Thank you.